Good morning. The title of my paper is Karol Wojtyla and Dignitatis Humanae, a Historical Perspective. At the beginning, I would like to thank the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for giving me the opportunity to take part in this symposium on the Declaration on Religious Freedom, Dignitatis Humanae, of the Second Vatican Council. Due to the restriction of time, I shall present a part of my paper which I have prepared for this conference. I shall bypass the two sections on the historical context, and I shall concentrate on Archbishop Karol Wojtyła's influence on the preparation of the Declaration Dignitatis Humanae, underlying the relationship between this declaration and the pastoral constitution Gaudium et Spes. I shall present the reception of this declaration during Wojtyła's time in Krakow, as well as during his pontificate. The contribution of Archbishop Karol Wojtyła. It should be noted that neither the Polish bishops nor bishops from other countries under communist rule were members of the commission who were responsible for preparing the draft on the Declaration on Religious Freedom. The influence of Polish bishops on preparing this document was limited to participating in the discussion at the council hall and the submission of written comments of subsequent revisions of the text of the schema. At the council, Wojtyła expressed his position regarding drafts of the document at key points in its development. First, as the place of religious freedom was debated, whether as a part of the document on ecumenism, and then during the third and fourth sessions, when the project was discussed in a separate document. We should also remember that during the Council's existence, Bishop Wojtyła delivered many sermons and conferences concerning the Second Vatican Council, both in Rome and in the Archdiocese, a number of which focused exclusively on the issue of religious freedom. Shortly after the closure of the second session, during which the draft on ecumenism was submitted to the Council Fathers, along with Chapter 5, the De Libertate Religiosa, Karol Wojtyła sent two notes to the Secretariat of the Council. He emphasized that the need for a separate document on issues of religious freedom in both a political and legal sense, as well as stressed that the right of citizens to practice religion was a natural human right in knowledge and living the truth. Karol Wojtyła suggested that this issue be the main topic in the schema concerning the Church in the modern world. In his speech during the third session in the Council Aula, Karol Wojtyła also pointed out that human dignity was not only the foundation of religious freedom, but also the rationality of human nature. He noted that the existence of countries openly hostile to religion necessitated a presentation of the rational nature of man and the objective importance of religion as a response to the transcendent nature of man, which neither isolated him from the society nor denied human reason. During the same session, in a sermon delivered in a Roman church, Wojtyła explained to the audience that the Council was undertaking a call of our age for preservation of human dignity. This was on the basis of the revelation, and the Council tried not to express the issue of human dignity in a single separate document, but in a draft regarding religious freedom and in a draft regarding the mission of the Church in the modern world. In these two texts, the fathers of the Council had developed an anthropology, a vision of man and his destiny. Wojtyła joined these two documents together as they were very close related. It should be noted that at the beginning of 1964, under Wojtyła's guidance, the Krakow Memorandum for the Schema 13th on the Church in the Modern World was prepared. This memorandum was approved by the Polish episcopate and was sent on to Rome in May of that year. Following this, when the debate on the Church in the Modern World started during the first session in the auditorium, the Archbishop mentioned this memorandum in his speech and left it again in the Secretariat of the Council. The text was known as Krakow Project. The issue of religious freedom in this project has been thoroughly covered. The first chapter is mostly devoted to this topic, which sets out the basis of the Church in the world. The existence of the Church is the result of God's will, and her activity in society is associated with man's right to religion. This right is discussed in both a transcendental dimension of conscience and the social nature of man. It is important to emphasize that the Church's mission is, on one hand, to help man exercise his fundamental right to religious freedom, and, on the other, to proclaim the truth of Christ and how to practice faith in everyday life without violating freedom of conscience. Starting with the basic definition of religious freedom, the following 3 chapters deal with the evangelizing mission of the Church. The project focuses on the notion that no one should be forced to embrace the faith, but no one should interfere with or even distract someone else from practicing religion. This is why the Church stands up for the rights of people so that they not be treated as second-class citizens. However, the Church cannot refuse help to followers of other faiths who have been denied this right, because human rights are universal and equal for all. In the Krakow Project, religious freedom is a condition of the mission of the Church in the modern world. At the same time, strengthening the right of religious freedom in both people's life and communities is one of the objectives of the Church's missions. In a society or in a state where the civil rights to religious freedom is observed, the respect for people with different views and religions is also protected both morally and culturally. At a meeting of the commission responsible for drafting the constitution of the Church in the modern world, which was held in Aricia, near Rome, in early February 1965, Archbishop Wojtyla brought a revised version of the Krakow Project. The text contained, among others, a new chapter on the Church's approach to atheism, especially in regard to political systems opposed to religion. In addition to the content previously presented, there was a statement in this chapter pointing out that violation of the right to religious freedom is also associated with a lack of respect for other human rights. It is in Aricia that a discussion took place among members of the Doctrinal Committee preparing the Constitution regarding the Krakow Project. As a result of that discussion, the members of this commission decided to introduce a new chapter, quote, "The Tasks of the Church in the Modern World," unquote, to the draft of the Pastoral Constitution. In this chapter of the Second Vatican Council Constitution, we learn that, quote, "No human law can protect the personal dignity and freedom of man like the belief in the gospel entrusted to the Church," unquote. The whole chapter shows the Church's contribution to the common good of society, of which the basis is religious freedom. We see how Gaudium et Spes and Dignitatis Humanae are connected. Overcoming controversies during the 4th session. During the debate of the Council's 4th and final session in September 1965, Karol Wojtyla spoke in the hall on behalf of the Polish episcopate. His speech can be summarized as arguing that conciliar teaching should reflect the complementarity of nature and grace. This is why the personal approach of religious freedom is important in showing the personal ethical aspect as a basis for its social ethical dimension. This relationship shows the human depth of religion, but also the objective nature of religion in society and its contribution to the common good. In this speech, Wojtyla also mentioned that it should be very clearly stated in the draft that restrictions on religious freedom as human rights based on natural law can only result from the moral norms of these natural laws. The restrictions of positive civil law with regard to religious freedom must be in accord with the natural moral law. It is important here to highlight that the major problem faced by the Polish bishops at the fourth session was that of limits on religious freedom, that is, situations in which civil authorities would or could curtail this right. According to the Polish bishops, there were several sentences in the draft that could be exploited by the communist authorities, providing them an opportunity for possible interference in religious affairs. All three Polish metropolitans spoke on the question of religious freedom in the name of the Polish episcopate. Both Archbishop Antoni Baraniak of Poznań and Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński, Primate of Poland, had raised the issue prior to Wojtyła's intervention. In their speeches, Baraniak and Wyszyński advocated amending the text in a way that would preclude its possible abuse by the communist authorities. Baraniak specifically asked that a clear provision be made in the document preventing any government from discriminating against people on the basis of religion. Wyszyński stressed that the draft did not take into account differences in the meaning of the concept of law, especially behind the Iron Curtain. For Marxists, the law serves the interests of the ruling class. It is not based on unchanging moral norms. Similarly, concepts such as freedom, the state, public order, and the common good are open to different interpretations. At the Council, after a month of arduous work in a committee, an improved version of the draft on religious freedom, Textus Recognitus, was distributed to the bishops on October 22nd. The main amendments requested by the Polish episcopate were not, however, included. The Polish bishops' minutes from the fourth session show not only certain regret on the bishop's behalf, but also the moral dilemma of whether to vote for the adoption of the declaration. They decided to send letters to Pope Paul VI and to the commission in charge of preparing the statement, asking them to take into account their postulates. Conversation between Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński and Bishop Emil de Smet, who was responsible for the draft, brought no solution. The Commission also had to take into account the situations where Catholics were a minority, and also terms such as public order, which had its own meaning for the civil authorities, which they could use to justify interference in the affairs of religious groups. The impasse was overcome thanks to the efforts of Karol Wojtyla. It is worth noting that they were not the Commission's members who chose Wojtyla as an alternative intermediary to Wyszyński. Wojtyla suggested to the Polish bishops that he himself could undertake talks with members of the Commission. Cardinal Wyszyński asked Bishop de Smet to allow the Archbishop of Krakow to speak with the Commission as a delegate of the Episcopate. As a result of the meeting on November 12th, small changes were made to the draft, which reduced the possible risk of abuse of the conciliar declaration by the communist authorities, and also gave the Polish bishops the moral right to vote in favor of this document. At the time, during a conference on Vatican Radio, Karol Wojtyla said, quote, "The Council has an apostolic character and works to widen and deepen religion, true revealed by God. The declaration, which highlights a person's real authority and freedom in this sphere, does not claim by any means that the matter of religion is something free. Neither liberalism nor religious indifference are supported or sanctioned by the Second Vatican Council's Declaration on Religious Freedom. The point, however, is the Declaration conveys the full expression of religion as an internal matter for man. Furthermore, it is something which is common to all believers. It is a deep and fundamental issue which concerns the free choice of man and his most important responsibility. Dignitatis Humanae's reception during Karol Wojtyła's Krakow period. Karol Wojtyła's reception of the Declaration of Dignitatis Humanae is made up of both a theological reflection and the legal and administrative aspects of the doctrine's application in the struggle for religious freedom in Poland. The book Sources of Renewal, the Implementation of Vatican II, is both a compendium and interpretation of doctrine of the Council. In the book, Wojtyła includes a declaration on religious freedom in terms of the Church ad intra and in relation to the world ad extra. Freedom of conscience expresses a personal dimension in the act of faith which is necessary in deepening our awareness of faith. It also emphasizes the importance of the doctrine of religious freedom in shaping attitudes of Christian responsibility and of ecumenical dialogue. He also talks about the social and political aspects of religious freedom and its importance to the Church's mission in the world. Religious freedom is portrayed as the requirement of building a community of the Church and a society through the apostolic involvement of the faithful in public life. The author quotes passages from all paragraphs of the Declaration, some repeatedly, demonstrating his in-depth knowledge of both the text and the doctrine of religious freedom in the context of the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. In his articles and papers related to the Council, Wojtyła particularly emphasizes the relationship between Dignitatis Humanae and the Constitution Dei Verbum and Gaudium et Spes in regard to Christian anthropology. He notes that this is a document that binds together various dialogue partners within the Church as well as with Christians of other denominations, no-Christian religions, and with the modern world. Dignitatis Humanae conveys the consciousness of the Church as community living in freedom and truth under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Among the almost 40 scholarly articles and papers by Wojtyła on the Second Vatican Council, one of them requires special attention. Specifically, this is an interesting paper presented in Bologna in 1975, entitled The Rights of Man in Light of the Second Vatican Council. In this paper, the Cardinal of Krakow clarified the objective importance of religious freedom in the context of civil rights and international treaties such as the final act of the Helsinki Conference on Security in 1975 and in the context of evangelization, which was the theme of the Synod in 1974. Wojtyła emphasized the Council's teachings that the Church is in Christ as a sacrament of union of men with God and with one another, Lumen Gentium number 1, and, quote, because it does not identify with the political community, it is both a sign and a safeguard of the transcendental dimension of man, unquote, Gaudium et Spes number 76. This means, according to him, that, quote, the Church possesses a declaration of the fundamental rights of man in the very essence of his being and his salvation, and that the question of man and all his rights is entered in the dynamics of faith, unquote. In this perspective, Wojtyła states that the Declaration Dignitatis Humanae is an authentic interpretation of the religious freedom and is an important contribution to the great question of human rights. At the heart of Dignitatis Humanae, there is an integral concept of man and his relation to the truth, and his moral responsibility for it. It is why, according to Wojtyła, The declaration is like a seed of, quote, personalistic revolution, unquote. In essence, a full defense of freedom and the transcendence of man, as well as the testimony of these transformations which take place in man under the influence of the gospel. Dignitatis Humanae sets the Church a mission which is to strive for the renewal of the social, political, and economic order by maintaining the primacy of spirit and morality. It is an urgent matter in the Third World, where the Church faces the problem of social injustice and poverty, in totalitarian systems, as well as the democratic countries of the West, in which unlimited freedom is destroying man's spiritual sensitivity. Wojtyla claims that in the context of all the programs about materialist inspiration, that a consistent implementation and defense of human spiritual freedom in both conscience and religion should be the primary task of evangelization. Wojtyla writes that a personalistic approach to religious freedom in Dignitatis Humanae should be applied in particular and concrete matters in life rather than left in overly general but abstract statements. This approach is evident in the Archbishop of Krakow's homilies, in which religious freedom is applied in relation to the rights of the family, to raising children and education, to the activities of apostolic associations, to the ban of the both churches' construction and Corpus Christi processions through the city streets. He raised the problems in both cities and villages, telling people about their right to God, to build, and also their dignity as human beings and citizens. Karol Wojtyła's efforts to build churches in Nowa Huta also acquired a symbolic significance. Nowa Huta, a new industrial district of Krakow, was built in the Stalinist period to be a city without God. The inhabitants of that district, who in large part were workers at its large steel factory, patiently demanded of state authorities the right to build churches. They often assembled in temporary chapels, frequently standing out in the open, even in winter. They often assembled in Karol Wojtyła's sermons at Nowa Huta attest to the truth that religious freedom is closely bound up with the defense of human dignity and of social justice. The struggle to build the first church there, which Cardinal Wojtyła consecrated only in 1977, lasted 20 years. In his homily at the consecration, Wojtyła stressed that human life cannot be reduced merely to economic principles of production and consumption. Quote, when Nowa Huta was built with the intention that this would be a city without God, without a church, then Christ came here together with the people and through their lips spoke the fundamental truth about man. Man in his history cannot be reckoned by economic principles alone, even according to the most exact rules of production and consumption. Man is greater than this. He is the image and likeness of God himself. Unquote. Particular attention should also be paid to Wojtyła's contribution to the Polish episcopate and a number of statements he prepared for the authorities of the communist regime, in which the issue of freedom of conscience is crucial. It is worth mentioning two memorandum addressed to the government on religious freedom, which would form the basis for the normalization of relations between the state and the church in Poland. The project was adopted by the Polish episcopate and passed on to the government. Wojtyła presents the main thesis Dignitatis Humanae and indicates that it is a binding doctrine of the Church and it corresponds to a modern representation of human rights and international declarations. He emphasizes that the protection of a worshipper's right at a citizen's level means a, quote, reliable application in the life of the state in regard to the right to religious freedom, unquote. Wojtyla claims that the normalization of relations between the church and the state can take place on the condition that the state relents from a program of forcing atheism on society. Thanks to this, the religious freedom of citizens and the church's activities will be factors in creating a common good. It is beyond question, we must recognize, the Declaration Dignitatis Humanae gave the Church behind the Iron Curtain a platform to operate in a complex political situation, of which Karol Wojtyla was able to take advantage. Respect for religion in the public sphere is both an internal reverence for human life and its social nature. That is why the presence of religion in public life cannot be, quote, controlled by the state, but should be considered an important element of the common good. The secularization of the public sphere, which can be understood as the elimination of religion, is an injustice and results in unequal treatment of worshippers who become second-class citizens for their belief in the truth of the faith which they have chosen. That process continues and is challenged in different forms throughout the world today, perhaps not by regimes ideologically committed to atheism, but by governments which, in the name of rights, are prepared to abridge the rights of believers as believers to participate in public life. The essential features of Dignitatis Humanae's reception during John Paul II's pontificate. Religious freedom connects the problems concerning man and socio-political life. Undoubtedly, this is one of the guiding themes of John Paul II's teaching and the subject of much of his work. The reception of Dignitatis Humanae during John Paul II's pontificate has doctrinal, ecumenical, cultural, socio-political, and prophetic dimensions. The development of interreligious dialogue, the promotion of nations' cultural identity, the contribution of John Paul II to the political changes in both Central and Eastern Europe and in the world, and in the process of, quote, cleaning of memories, unquote, in the Church's confession to having violated the freedom of conscience. None of these histories can be separated from the Pope's teaching on religious freedom. Similarly, we cannot forget the Holy Father's concern about the Church's presence and its evangelical message in the public and international arena. It is not possible here to mention in detail all the papal documents, greetings, and messages, especially those associated with the World Day of Peace, or speeches at the United Nations, nor the speeches to diplomats, as well as those in the many places when the Pope spoke about religious freedom. We will mention just a few of the essential features of his teaching on religious freedom. The first feature of John Paul II's beliefs regarding religious freedom is that it is the basis of other human rights and, quote, enabling this right is one man's fundamental tests of authentic progress in any regime, society, system, or milieu, unquote. Redemptor hominis, number 17. This involves demonstrating the integral vision of man and the doctrine of moral law written in the rational nature of man. The second key feature is the indication that in the socio-political arena, religious freedom is the criterion of the, quote, coherence of the state's legal system, unquote, and the, quote, maturity of civil society, unquote. Respect for religious freedom by the state is a de facto recognition of matters which are outside political reach. It highlights the values which the state must serve and is also a measure of democracy. The third feature of John Paul II's reflection is the combination of religious freedom with cultural identity and the historical rights of nations to self-determination. The following can also be attached to this theme: a parent's right for their children to have a religious education, the right of the Church to conduct its own education, and also the right to religious instruction in public schools. The fourth feature is that maintaining religious freedom is a prerequisite for true peace, because the process of unification of the world cannot ignore the matters of the human spirit and the contribution of religion to the common good, and also through formation of a moral people. The fifth feature is the relationship of religious freedom with the mission of the Church. This regards both a respect for the individual and his conscience in the Church community, and the right for the Church to carry out religious activities in public life. The Church, in leading evangelization, demands a respect for religious freedom, and in this sees a task resulting from the Gospel's truth about man's dignity, and the right to search for the truth. John Paul II advocated the use of reciprocity to respect religious minorities as well as to demand respect where Catholics were a religious minority. Focusing on religious freedom as the theme of evangelization is highly relevant now at a time when more and more people are religiously indifferent and need the truth of Christ presented in all its depth and brilliance. John Paul II wrote in his message for the 30th anniversary of Dignitatis Humanae, quote, "The Church neither desires nor seeks to see any worldly power placed at the service of the truth it bears. It asks only to be allowed to address man in the question of his freedom, and it asks that all human beings be given the freedom to respond to the gospel in the full measure of their humanity." Unquote. John Paul II is also a personal witness of hope in religious freedom's great cause. Despite the pressure of ideologies and political systems which disregard the human spirit and force religion to become merely a private act, the Pope called on us not to lose heart for the sake of the true good of man and society. John Paul II gave a speech to the diplomatic corps on January the 10th, 2005, inspiring hope, which he said, quote, "Here, let there be no legitimate fear for religious freedom that would limit other freedoms or be harmful to the life of civil society. On the contrary, together with religious freedom, all other freedoms develop and thrive, inasmuch as freedom is an inseparable good, man's prerogative of himself and his dignity. In many states, religious freedom is a right which has not yet been sufficiently or adequately recognized. Yet, the yearning for religious freedom cannot be suppressed. As long as human beings live, it will always be present and pressing." Unquote. Thank you.